they are not aware of the massive presence of China for 30 years. No? And suddenly in 2024, they say, how is it possible that China has such an important presence in our backyard? There is an ongoing discussion in the United States and particularly in Washington. I would say an ongoing political discussion with insufficient, I say it very politely, with insufficient economic knowledge of how trade in North America and related to China is going on. So the political argument in Washington since Biden, but also with Trump, is Mexico is becoming the backdoor of Chinese exports to the United States. No? So the United States and China are having a trade conflict or a trade war since 2018. President Trump initiated this trade war with China in 2018. And you know what? This is the argument. Mexico is not having a trade war, neither with China nor with the US. And Mexico has a big sign when you come in Mexico, welcome China. Mexico is importing massively Chinese goods and exporting them to the United States. This is not the case. No, again, the political discussion might be ideologically very appealing, but again, I highlight new triangular relationships. China is the second largest trading partner of Mexico since 2003. For more than 20 years. So this is not a weekend happening, but this has been going on all over the 21st century. The problem is that the so-called think tanks in Washington, D.C., they are neither think nor tanks regarding Latin America, China, and the United States. These so-called think tanks, they have not been doing their homework. They have not been informing the Washington audience adequately and correctly. This profound integration between Latin America and Mexico with China has been going on for 30 years. And again, suddenly, it has become fashionable to blame, again, this political discussion always requires to blame someone. I blame China, I blame Mexico, I blame Panama, Of course, you never like to see yourself in front of a mirror and say, you know what, the king or the queen is naked. You know what, the United States has profound economic problems in terms of fiscal deficit, in terms of innovation, of competitiveness, etc. No? So the Washington audience, the respective parties, politicians, have been ill-informed. No? They are not aware of the massive presence of China for 30 years. No? And suddenly, in 2024, they say, how is it possible that China has such an important presence in our backyard? They wish that the problem goes away in a weekend. This will not happen. We are speaking of very complex industrial structures. I have been, for example, examining and working with business organizations in Mexico regarding footwear. No, not auto parts, not automobiles, but footwear. 30 years ago, 85% of Mexican inputs for the footwear in global value chain came from the United States. Today, 90% of Mexican footwear industry inputs come from China and Vietnam. The supply of United States firms to Mexico in the footwear global value chain has disappeared. promoted, by the way, also by US firms. US firms that export from Mexico to the United States require please use this supplier, which is in Chongqing, this other one, which is in Shenzhen. Don't forget this supplier, they have good prices, good quality in Chengdu, etc., etc. They require Mexican firms use the suppliers I've been working on for decades. And it is very interesting that in the last years, around 7.5% of Mexican exports to the US is Chinese value added. So, yes, Chinese value added. You have a car that says made in Mexico, but you know what? Wheels, chassis, windshields, and other parts are coming from China. The final good says hecho en Mexico. But who is importing massively goods in Mexico from China? 70% of Mexican imports are imported by foreign firms. 70%. So the main importers in Mexico of Chinese goods, the name of these firms are General Motors, Stellantis, is the Ford, IBM, and many others. There is not one single Chinese car that is being produced in Mexico and exported to the United States. No, this is one of the main accusations. No, Chinese firms will export electric vehicles, BYD, to the United States. This will not happen. BYD, they are not stupid. They know that if they export one car, they will fire it, I don't know, in Washington Square. And I told you so. This is the demonstration that Mexico is a backdoor for Chinese firms. They have not done this, and they will not do this in the short and medium run. Surprise! I'm not blaming anyone. I'm simply saying, you know what? We have a very mature and difficult and complex relationship between the United States, China, and Mexico. And it is not as easy as the discussion in Washington to say, I'm going to blame Mexico or I'm going to blame China. You know what? Your tariffs are going to affect mainly US firms established in Mexico. Surprise. No, again, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm simply explaining how trade, industry, fabrication, global value chains have changed drastically in 30 years, and this will not change in a weekend. No, if you want to substitute for imports from tires from China for a car, this will not be easy. The Vatican does not produce any tires. Switzerland, they do not produce tires. So where will I get 20, 30 million tires that today are being supplied by Chinese imports? No, so very complex process that have been going on for decades. As a matter of fact, we have a monitor of Chinese outbound foreign direct investment that we publish every year since 2017, brief reports, annual reports in Chinese, in Spanish, and in English. No, for Latin America, including, of course, Mexico. No, so Chinese investments in Mexico have been going on in the last 15 years. Again, Washington was not aware of this. They were in their own discussions, but they were not aware what was going on in their backyard. And suddenly they found, you know what? China has been investing accumulatively until 2023 for 22.5 billion US dollars. So what we are witnessing is the Chinese investment slowly. It's not that suddenly in 2023 we have massive investments. No, since 2010, 2015, 2020, Chinese investment, and very surprisingly, different than in most of Latin America, Chinese investments in Mexico were mainly by private firms, not public firms. And B, the main sector of interest of Chinese investment in Mexico were manufacturing. So, very interestingly, Chinese firms in Mexico practically do not export directly to the United States or to other countries. Investments are oriented to the domestic market in Mexico, from shoes to underwear to telecommunications to electronics to whatever. So it's a very interesting specialization of Chinese investments in Mexico, very differently than, for example, in Argentina, Chile, or Brazil in South America, where Chinese investments have specialized in raw materials, in oil, in gas, in minerals, meat, soya, etc. Mexico does not have these raw materials such as Chile or Brazil. So Chinese investments, intelligently, I would highlight, they have learned a lot in the last 20 years, and they have understood that the strength of Mexico is not soya and not oil, but mainly manufacturing. Just a few weeks ago, at the end of December, we published the third report on aspects for a national strategy vis-à-vis China. The subheading is not irrelevant, New Triangular Relationships. This is a document of 35 pages, 27 proposals, no? And the subheading is fundamental. Mexico, as Brazil, Argentina, and other countries, need an agenda, a working program vis-à-vis the United States, of course, but also, and, not or, and China. The blackmailing from Washington increasingly insists, are you going to marry me or China? You cannot marry both, no? But the new triangular relationship concept invites to say it is the United States and China. We have more than 130 years of diplomatic relations with China, with the People's Republic of China since 1972 for 53 years. And so we have a very profound, rich, and mature relationship. It's not a matter of saying, shall we continue or shall we not continue? We have a very rich cultural, economic, political, technological exchange. And you know what? In some cases, in the last 100 years, we have had discussions, difficulties, and in some cases, we have had different opinions. This might happen in 2025, but this does not mean I'm going to put on hold my full relationship with my second most important trading partner. I always say very humbly, but very realistically, China is the new rich guy in town, in the global village, no? And so China has lots of money to be spent on innovation, on education, on infrastructure, etc. Contrary to the old rich guy in town, no, who finds out my infrastructure is old, my education is not working out, I am not competitive in many industries that I used to be the leader. You know what? You are not anymore. But the old rich guy in town is still rich. They still have the US dollar. They have a credit system, a financial system. They have nuclear weapons, etc. No, so it's going to be a very difficult negotiation in terms of the confrontation between the US and China, and for third countries. No, I would always say Latin America, Mexico, but also Vietnam and Germany. They will have to deal very pragmatically regarding this new triangular relationship. It will be a very difficult times, even regarding military issues in Asia and other parts of the world, unfortunately.